The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Full-length summary. Introduction. A new way forward for innovation. In the fast-moving world of startups, many passionate entrepreneurs find themselves trapped in a frustrating cycle. They come up with a promising idea, assemble a team, work day and night to perfect a product, and finally launch it to the public, only to discover that no one actually wants what they've built. This tragic but common scenario highlights a critical problem in the world of innovation. We're still using outdated methods to build new products. For decades, business plans, 5-year projections, and rigid development cycles were the norm. But in a world where technologies change rapidly and customer needs evolve unpredictably, this traditional model has become a liability. Eric Ries, through his personal experiences in both successful and failed startups, realized that what entrepreneurs needed was a scientific method for innovation. A new framework that allowed them to build products more intelligently, test their assumptions early, and respond quickly to real-world feedback. That framework became what he called the Lean Startup. This book is not just about how to build a startup, it is about how to change the way we work. Whether you're an engineer, a manager, or a dreamer with a bold idea, the Lean Startup offers a systematic, replicable process to help you innovate faster, reduce waste, and turn ideas into products that customers actually want. Chapter 1. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. In the popular imagination, entrepreneurs are often seen as young tech geniuses working out of garages in Silicon Valley. But Eric Ries challenges this limited view right from the start. According to him, an entrepreneur is anyone who operates in an environment of extreme uncertainty and seeks to create something new. This includes a group of university students building a new app, a team inside a multinational company creating a new digital service, a non-profit organization trying to solve a complex social problem using a new tool or method. In short, entrepreneurs are everywhere, and therefore the principles of the Lean Startup can be applied everywhere, not just in venture-backed startups. The startup as a human institution. One of the first key concepts Ries introduces is that a startup is not just a product or a company, it is a human institution. This means that even with the same product idea, different teams could build completely different businesses depending on how they operate. So what matters most in a startup is not the brilliance of the initial idea, but how the team works together to learn, adapt, and grow. Startups are unique in that they operate with very limited resources, limited time, and, most importantly, under conditions of extreme uncertainty. There is no clear map, no guaranteed customer base, and no obvious path to success. Traditional management tools, which assume stability and predictability, are ill-suited for this environment. What startups need is a new kind of management, one that embraces experimentation, agility, and rapid iteration. The importance of vision. Every startup begins with a vision, a belief that the world needs something that doesn't exist yet. This vision acts as a guiding light. But many entrepreneurs confuse the vision with the product. The product is only a means to achieve the vision, not the vision itself. Ries emphasizes that being committed to a vision doesn't mean sticking blindly to the original product idea. It means staying true to the problem you're trying to solve, while being flexible about the solutions you test along the way. This distinction is critical. Many startups fail not because their vision was wrong, but because they were unwilling to adjust their product when it became clear that it wasn't working. Case study, IMVU and the early mistakes. To illustrate these ideas, Ries shares his personal journey with IMVU, a company he co-founded that created a 3D social networking platform. Like many startups, IMVU was full of talented, dedicated people. But they made a critical mistake early on. They spent months building a complex product with lots of features, believing that they needed to launch something impressive right away. When they finally launched, they were shocked to find that customers didn't care about most of the features they had spent so much time building. In fact, many users didn't even understand the product. This was a painful but eye-opening experience. It taught Ries that speed and learning were more important than perfection. The goal of a startup is not to launch a polished product, it is to learn what customers actually want, as quickly and efficiently as possible. A new management paradigm. The Lean Startup approach is a response to these lessons. It argues that startups should focus on validated learning, systematically testing assumptions with real data, rapid experimentation, quickly building and testing new ideas, agility and flexibility, changing direction when the data shows it's necessary, customer feedback, listening to what users actually do, not just what they say. By applying these principles, even large organizations can act more like startups, faster, smarter, and more resilient in the face of uncertainty. Reflection. This first chapter does more than redefine what a startup is. It reframes how we should think about innovation itself. It tells us that the old ways of managing projects, detailed upfront planning, long development cycles, delayed feedback, are no longer effective in today's world. Instead, we must embrace uncertainty as a feature, not a flaw, of the innovation process. We must also recognize that anyone with the courage to try something new, to solve a problem that hasn't been solved before, is an entrepreneur. And once we see that, we realize that the lean startup is not just a method, it's a mindset. A mindset that prizes learning over ego, experimentation over rigidity, and customer reality over personal fantasy. Chapter 2. Validated Learning. The Real Progress in Startups. What if everything we thought about progress in a startup was wrong? In traditional business thinking, progress is measured by milestones, product launches, user acquisition, revenue targets, investor rounds. But for startups, which are often navigating complete uncertainty, these metrics can be deceptive. You might build something amazing, but if it's not solving a real problem for real people, it's not progress, it's waste. This is where Eric Ries introduces one of the most foundational concepts of the lean startup: validated learning. What is validated learning? Validated learning is a rigorous, evidence-based process of discovering what customers actually want. It's not guessing, it's not assuming, and it's definitely not about building based on intuition. Instead, it's about forming hypotheses, testing them with real customers, and letting the data speak. Unlike traditional learning, which is often theoretical, vague, or anecdotal, validated learning is measurable. It produces real results. It tells you what's working, what's not, and whether your current direction is worth continuing. This learning, says Ries, is the true measure of progress in a startup. If you're not learning about your customers, your market, and your product's potential fit, then no matter how much you build or how fast you grow, you are not truly moving forward. Learning versus execution. In established companies, execution is king. The focus is on efficiency, predictability, and performance. But in a startup, execution without learning is a recipe for failure. Imagine running full speed ahead, only to realize too late that you've been heading in the wrong direction. That's what happens when startups prioritize execution without first validating their direction. Validated learning helps you ensure that you're building the right product before you build it the right way. The build, measure, learn feedback loop. To enable validated learning, Ries proposes a three-step loop that serves as the heartbeat of every lean startup. Build, measure, learn. Build. Start with a hypothesis. For example, customers will pay for access to this tool. And build the minimum viable product, MVP, that will allow you to test that hypothesis. Measure. Release the MVP to real users and collect data. Track what users do, not just what they say. Learn. Analyze the data to determine whether your hypothesis was correct. Did users actually behave the way you expected? If not, it's time to adjust. This feedback loop should be repeated as quickly and as often as possible, because each cycle generates more validated learning. And the faster a startup can learn, the sooner it can achieve a product-market fit, or pivot towards something that works better. The minimum viable product, MVP. At the heart of validated learning lies the minimum viable product, a version of the product stripped down to its most essential components, built only to test a core assumption. The MVP is not about quality, elegance, or completeness. In fact, an MVP might be ugly, incomplete, or even partially fake, as long as it helps you learn something essential about your customers. Here are some real-world examples. Dropbox. Before building a full product, They created a simple demo video that showed how Dropbox would work. The video went viral and generated thousands of signups, validating the assumption that people wanted this kind of tool. Zappos. Instead of building a huge warehouse and inventory system, the founder started by posting pictures of shoes online. When someone ordered a pair, he went to the local store, bought them, and shipped them himself. It was manual, inefficient, but it proved that customers were willing to buy shoes online. These MVPs helped validate key assumptions with minimal investment. That's the power of validated learning. Avoiding the waste of overbuilding. One of the most dangerous mistakes startups make is building too much, too soon. They assume they know what customers want, and they try to perfect the product before showing it to anyone. This approach is not only risky, it's incredibly wasteful. By the time the product launches, they've often burned through months of development time and large sums of money, only to discover that they were wrong about core assumptions. Validated learning turns that process upside down. It says, test first, build second. Learn before you scale. Measuring learning. Actionable metrics versus vanity metrics. Once you start testing, it's crucial to measure the right things. Ries warns against vanity metrics, numbers that look good but don't help you make better decisions. Examples of vanity metrics. Total number of downloads. Total revenue without context. Number of social media likes or followers. Instead, focus on actionable metrics, data that clearly tells you whether your assumptions are correct. For example, what percentage of users sign up after visiting the site? How many users come back a second time? What is the customer acquisition cost versus the customer lifetime value? Startups should design cohort-based experiments, comparing different groups of users over time, to ensure that their growth is driven by real improvements, not luck or external factors. When to pivot. One of the biggest benefits of validated learning is that it helps startups decide when to pivot. A pivot is a fundamental change in strategy, based on what the startup has learned. Validated learning gives entrepreneurs the data they need to make this tough decision with confidence. If your MVPs consistently fail to generate traction, it may be time to shift your approach. But if your metrics show steady improvement, it's a sign that you're on the right track. Learning protects startups from both blind perseverance and premature abandonment. It helps you stay grounded, informed, and flexible. Reflection. Validated learning may not sound exciting. It doesn't involve brilliant ideas or dramatic breakthroughs. But it is, without question, the most powerful engine of progress for any startup. It replaces guesswork with evidence, hope with data, and intuition with insight. It creates a disciplined, repeatable process for innovation. And perhaps most importantly, it helps entrepreneurs build things that people actually want, not just things they think people want. In a world full of uncertainty, validated learning is the closest thing to a compass. It won't eliminate risk, but it will ensure that your risks are smart, strategic, and informed by reality. Chapter 3. Build, Measure, Learn. The core feedback loop of innovation. Every startup is a grand experiment. The goal is to figure out the right product, for the right people at the right time, before running out of time and money. But how do you run this experiment in a structured way? Eric Ries answers that question with the Build, Measure, Learn feedback loop, the central engine of the lean startup method. This loop isn't just a theoretical concept. It's a practical framework that entrepreneurs can apply daily to test assumptions, refine ideas, and make smarter decisions. In this chapter, Ries dives deep into how this loop works, why it's so powerful, and how to speed it up to maximize learning and minimize waste. The purpose of a startup: learn as quickly as possible. Contrary to popular belief, the goal of a startup is not to build a product. The true goal is to learn how to build a sustainable business. Every feature, every line of code, every dollar spent should be focused on one objective: learning what works. This learning happens through experimentation. But not random experimentation. Purposeful, hypothesis-driven tests. And each of these tests should follow the Build, Measure, Learn loop. Let's explore each part of this cycle. 1. Build. turning ideas into testable products. The first step is to build something, but not just anything. The goal is to create a minimum viable product, MVP, designed to test a specific hypothesis. This product doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be complete. It just needs to be enough to start the learning process. Examples: a landing page explaining your idea, with a form to collect interest. A concierge MVP, where you manually perform the service to understand customer behavior. A simple prototype or mock-up that simulates the product experience. The key is to build as little as possible to learn as much as possible. This is a radical shift from the traditional idea of product development, where companies invest months or years building a perfect product before showing it to the world. In Lean Startup, we flip that model. We show the product first, and perfect it later based on real data. 2. Measure. Collecting meaningful data from real users. Once the MVP is live, the next step is to measure how people interact with it. But it's not enough to gather data. You must gather the right data. This means avoiding vanity metrics that make you feel good but don't guide decisions. Using cohort analysis to track different user groups over time. Measuring against a clear hypothesis. For example, if your hypothesis is that users will sign up if they see a 30-second demo, then your measurement should focus on conversion rates from demo views to signups, not just page visits or total signups. By designing experiments with clear success metrics in advance, you avoid the temptation to cherry-pick data or move the goalposts. This keeps you honest and focused on real learning. 3. Learn. Deciding what to do next. Once you've collected data, you need to analyze it and ask, did this test validate our assumption? If not, what does that tell us? From this learning, you can make a crucial decision. Persevere. If the hypothesis is confirmed, keep going in the current direction. Pivot. If the hypothesis is disproved, change some fundamental aspect of the product, strategy, or target market. This decision is where many startups struggle. It's hard to let go of your original vision. But Lean Startup teaches that learning is more valuable than being right. If the data says something's not working, ignoring it is not courage, it's delusion. Speeding up the loop. The faster a startup can go through this loop, the more it can learn, and the more likely it is to find success before resources run dry. But how do you speed up the loop? Reduce the size of MVPs. Don't build full products. Test tiny pieces of your idea. Automate testing and measurement. Use tools to quickly gather and analyze data. Remove organizational bottlenecks. Eliminate slow approval processes or layers of unnecessary bureaucracy. Empower small teams. Let teams make decisions without waiting for top-down direction. By making the build, measure, learn loop faster and more efficient, startups can iterate quickly, respond to real feedback, and build momentum. Example: IMVU's early feedback loops. Eric Ries shares how, in the early days of IMVU, they released new code to customers up to 50 times a day. This continuous deployment allowed them to test new features instantly, get immediate feedback, and adapt in real time. This approach wasn't just about engineering efficiency. It was about creating a culture of experimentation, where every decision could be tested and improved upon through real-world data. That culture is at the heart of the Lean Startup mindset. Test, learn, adapt, repeat. The fallacy of the big launch. One of the most dangerous myths in startups is the belief in the big launch. The idea that you can work quietly on a masterpiece, launch it with a bang, and instantly achieve success. Rise argues that big launches are not only risky, they're often disastrous. You only get one shot to make a first impression, and if you haven't validated your assumptions beforehand, that shot could be wasted. Instead, lean startup companies favor small launches, early and often, so they can adjust before it's too late. Reflection. The build, measure, learn loop is deceptively simple. But when practiced with discipline, it becomes a powerful framework that can transform how startups operate. It moves the focus away from grand visions and toward grounded, real-time learning. It shifts the mindset from "how do we launch?" to "what can we learn today?" This loop also breaks down the wall between product development and market testing. In the lean startup, those two things are not separate stages, they happen simultaneously, in constant iteration. More than anything, this chapter teaches that the ultimate goal of every startup is not building. It's learning how to build a sustainable business. And that learning must be deliberate, focused, and driven by real user behavior. The faster we build, measure, and learn, the closer we get to products that truly matter. Chapter 4. Experiment. Start before you think you're ready. Most entrepreneurs think their journey begins with a brilliant idea. Something bold. Something disruptive. They believe that once they have the idea, the next step is to execute, to build, launch, and sell. But Eric Ries challenges this notion. He says that in a true lean startup, ideas don't come first, experiments do. In this chapter, he explains how every startup is an experiment, and how adopting the scientific method can help founders avoid wasting time, money, and energy building something nobody wants. The startup as an experiment. What is a startup, really? Ries defines it as a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. That uncertainty makes everything risky, even the idea itself. This is why Ries insists that before building a product, you should build an experiment. This means testing your assumptions with real people, under real-world conditions, to see whether your vision holds up. This process doesn't just apply to the product. It applies to your business model, pricing strategy, customer acquisition channels, distribution plan. Every one of these components is based on assumptions, and unless those assumptions are tested, your startup is flying blind. The scientific method for entrepreneurs. At the core of this chapter is a powerful analogy. The lean startup method is like the scientific method. In science, the process goes like this. Make an observation. Form a hypothesis. Design an experiment to test it. Measure the results. Draw conclusions. Repeat. Ries argues that startups should operate the same way. For example, hypothesis: early adopters will pay $10 per month for this time-saving tool. Experiment: create a landing page offering the tool at $10 per month and track how many people sign up. Result: if no one signs up, the hypothesis is disproved. This kind of experimental mindset allows entrepreneurs to make evidence-based decisions, rather than relying on gut feelings or optimistic guesses. Leap of faith assumptions. Every startup rests on a set of leap of faith assumptions, core beliefs that, if proven wrong, will cause the business to fail. These assumptions fall into two main categories. Value hypothesis. Does the product deliver value to customers once they use it? Growth hypothesis. How will new customers discover the product? For example, a value hypothesis might be, users who try our app will use it daily for at least a week. If this proves false, then no amount of growth will save the product. Ries says startups must identify their riskiest assumptions early, and test them first. These assumptions are often the least comfortable to face. They challenge the very foundation of the business idea. But the longer they go untested, the greater the risk of catastrophic failure down the line. Running the first experiment. So how do you run your first real experiment? Start by asking, what do we need to learn first? The answer will tell you what to test. Then ask, what's the simplest way to test this without building the full product? That's your MVP. It could be a landing page with a pre-order button, a digital ad campaign testing messaging, a survey or customer interview, a crowdfunding campaign. These are not random stabs in the dark. They are structured experiments, designed to validate your most crucial assumptions with the least amount of effort. This approach allows startups to start learning immediately, long before they write a single line of production code. Case study: food on the table. One of the most compelling examples in this chapter is Food on the Table, a startup that helps families plan meals and shop efficiently. Instead of building a full-featured app right away, the founder began by manually visiting customers, creating meal plans, and emailing grocery lists, all by hand. It was time-consuming, inefficient, and not scalable. But it allowed him to test. Do people actually want this service? Once he validated that people were not only using the service but also willing to pay for it, he slowly began automating the process. The product grew organically, based on what customers actually needed. This is the lean startup approach in action. Start small, test often, learn fast. The problem with stealth mode. Many startups operate in stealth mode for months or years, afraid to show their ideas too soon. They worry about competition, criticism, or failure. Ries argues that this is a mistake. In today's fast-paced environment, the real danger isn't having your idea stolen. It's spending years building the wrong thing in silence. The sooner you expose your ideas to the real world, the sooner you learn whether they're worth pursuing. And if they're not, you pivot before it's too late. Startups should embrace feedback, not fear it. From experiment to innovation accounting. As startups begin to test assumptions and gather data, they need a way to track progress. This leads to the concept of innovation accounting, which is introduced here and expanded in later chapters. In essence, innovation accounting is the process of measuring learning through experiments, showing that your product is improving over time in ways that matter to customers. This moves startups away from vague progress and toward real accountability. Reflection. In this chapter, Eric Ries fundamentally reshapes how we think about entrepreneurship. A startup isn't a grand execution of a perfect plan. It's a series of small, structured experiments, each designed to answer a question and reduce uncertainty. This mindset may feel unnatural at first. It requires humility, flexibility, and a willingness to be wrong. But it's also freeing. It means you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to keep asking the right questions and testing them quickly and honestly. The startup that runs more experiments learns faster. And the startup that learns faster has a better shot at survival and success. Chapter 5, Leap. Making the foundational jumps with eyes wide open. Entrepreneurship is often romanticized as a bold leap of faith. And to some extent, that's true. Startups are built on ideas that don't yet have proof, markets that don't yet exist, and technologies that are often still evolving. But Eric Ries brings us back to a grounded reality. Not all leaps are created equal. The smart entrepreneur doesn't leap blindly. They leap with eyes wide open, ready to validate or invalidate their most critical assumptions. In this chapter, Ries explores what it really means to take a leap in the lean startup framework. He shows that while vision is essential, learning and testing are what transform vision into value. The vision is the source of the leap. Every startup begins with a vision, a belief that something new and better is possible. This vision can't be proven at the outset. If it could, it wouldn't be innovative. The founder's vision contains a product idea, a market opportunity, a unique value proposition. These form the strategy that guides early decisions. But most of these elements are built on untested assumptions. Ries emphasizes that the leap is not the vision itself. The leap is betting on assumptions without yet having data. This means founders must learn to identify which assumptions are leaps, and then prioritize testing them before building too far. Analogies and antilogies. How to frame the leap. To guide this process, Ries introduces two powerful tools from the world of strategy: analogies and antilogies. An analogy is when you model your startup after a successful predecessor. We're like YouTube, but for gamers. An antilogy is when you intentionally do the opposite of a predecessor. Unlike Facebook, we don't collect any user data. These tools help entrepreneurs articulate the assumptions behind their strategy. They reveal what you believe will work based on past patterns, and what you believe should be done differently. But more importantly, these analogies and antilogies help clarify what needs to be tested, which elements of the model are being copied, which elements are new, risky, and unproven. Once these assumptions are identified, the lean startup approach says, test them early. Case study: the story of Zappos. A classic example is Zappos, the online shoe retailer. The idea that people would buy shoes without trying them on was a major leap of faith assumption. Instead of building a massive warehouse or full-scale e-commerce platform, founder Nick Swinmurn ran a simple test. He took photos of shoes from local stores and posted them online. When people bought a pair, he would go buy the shoes himself and mail them to the customer. This experiment validated the core assumption. Yes, people are willing to buy shoes online. That early leap, grounded in a small but powerful test, laid the foundation for a billion-dollar business. The danger of untested strategy. Many startups fail not because the vision was wrong, but because the strategy to realize the vision was never tested. Founders often fall into the trap of building a full product based on untested beliefs, launching it with hope, not data, scrambling to explain disappointing results. The lean startup model prevents this by encouraging teams to test the strategy before scaling it. You can still be bold, but you must also be rigorous. Rise encourages entrepreneurs to ask themselves, what must be true for our business to succeed? How can we test whether that's actually true right now? This mindset turns the leap from a blind jump into a calculated step forward. The role of vision, holding on and letting go. One of the paradoxes of entrepreneurship is that a founder must hold tightly to their vision, but be ready to let go of their strategy. This is difficult. The line between perseverance and stubbornness is thin. But the lean startup teaches that vision is the North Star. It doesn't change easily. Strategy is flexible. It evolves based on data and learning. As Ries puts it, startups are not just about making stuff. They are about learning how to build a sustainable business. Sometimes that learning leads to confirming the original path. But often, it leads to a pivot, a fundamental change in direction that still honors the original vision. Actionable steps for making the leap. At the end of the chapter, Ries offers guidance on how to make smart leaps. State your leap of faith assumptions clearly. Write down what you're assuming about your product, market, customer behavior, and pricing. Design a test for each assumption. How can you know, as quickly and cheaply as possible, whether the assumption holds? Don't wait to test. Early tests will save months, or years, of wasted effort later. Let data, not ego, drive decisions. If the assumption fails, adjust the strategy. That's not failure, that's learning. Reflection. The leap is a necessary part of every startup journey, but it should never be taken lightly. Vision is important. Passion is essential. But unchecked assumptions are dangerous. Eric Ries shows that the boldest entrepreneurs are not those who gamble everything. They are those who test everything. This chapter reminds us that true innovation requires humility. The willingness to say, I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. When you make your leap with eyes open, data in hand, and feedback in motion, you dramatically increase your odds of landing on solid ground. Chapter 6. Test. Validate learning through the minimum viable product, MVP. At this stage in the lean startup journey, the entrepreneur has articulated a vision, identified leap of faith assumptions, and prepared to take the first experimental steps. But now comes one of the most misunderstood and most critical concepts in the entire methodology: the minimum viable product, or MVP. In this chapter, Eric Ries unpacks the true purpose of the MVP. It's not a prototype. It's not a beta version. It's a learning tool, designed to test specific hypotheses with real customers, as quickly and efficiently as possible. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is validated learning. The real purpose of an MVP. There's a common misconception that an MVP is just a cheaper version of the final product. But that misses the point. The MVP isn't meant to serve everyone or solve every problem. Its role is simple: to test whether your assumptions about customer behavior are true or false. That's it. It's the fastest path to real-world feedback on your leap of faith assumptions. It helps you learn. Will customers buy this? Will they use it? Do they care at all? Instead of investing months or years building a perfect product, You use the MVP to start learning on day one. Building to learn, not to launch. In traditional startups, building is about launching. Teams spend months in secrecy building a product they hope people will love, only to face confusion or apathy at launch. The lean startup flips this mindset. In lean, you build in order to learn, not to impress. The MVP is not the product. It's the experiment. The only real failure is to build something and learn nothing. Rise challenges founders to resist the temptation to polish, perfect, or over-engineer their MVP. The moment you start thinking, what will people think if they see this? You're focusing on appearances, not learning. And learning is what matters most. Types of MVPs. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to an MVP. Rise outlines a range of MVP types that startups can use depending on their business model and resources. 1. Smoke test. This involves marketing a product before it exists, a landing page, an ad, or a video demo. Customers can click to buy or sign up, and the number of clicks becomes your validation metric. Famous example: Dropbox. Before building their full product, the founders created a simple video explaining the concept. The overwhelming interest they received validated demand before a single line of code was written. 2. Concierge MVP. In this version, you manually deliver the service to a small group of early adopters. The goal is to observe real behavior and iterate quickly, even if it means doing things that don't scale. Famous example: Food on the Table, mentioned in the previous chapter. 3. Wizard of Oz MVP. Here, the product looks fully automated on the outside, but is powered manually behind the scenes. Customers believe the service is live, while the startup quietly tests functionality without heavy development costs. This helps test user interactions and interest without building full infrastructure. 4. Single feature MVP. You release a product with just one core feature to test whether it solves the customer's problem. This prevents scope creep and keeps your focus narrow. If the single feature isn't valued, the rest of your product won't matter. Case study: IMVU. Rise returns to his experience with IMVU, the 3D social network for teens. Initially, the team built a complex product with dozens of features. But no one was using it. They realized they had built too much without validating anything. So they scaled back, re-released a bare-bones version, and began observing user behavior. That simple MVP helped them discover what customers actually wanted and didn't want. This painful lesson became one of the core inspirations for the lean startup method. Dealing with fear of launching early. A common objection to releasing an MVP is fear. What if customers hate it? What if we get bad press? What if it damages our brand? Rise addresses this head-on. In early stages, most people don't care enough about your startup to remember mistakes. Negative feedback from early adopters is a gift. It helps you improve. Holding back your product out of fear leads to wasted time and false confidence. The truth is, the world rarely notices a failed MVP. But your team will benefit from the learning it provides, every single time. The MVP is not the end. It's the beginning. It's easy to misunderstand the MVP as a quick fix or a short-term hack. But in lean startup, the MVP is part of a much larger cycle. Build, measure, learn. Each MVP leads to learning, which informs the next build, which leads to more learning. Over time, you iterate your way toward a sustainable, scalable product that customers actually want. The MVP is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a feedback loop that drives continuous innovation. Metrics that matter. When releasing an MVP, it's critical to focus on actionable metrics, not vanity metrics. Vanity metric: 10,000 people visited your site. Actionable metric: 500 people clicked, buy now, and 50 actually purchased. Lean startups measure success not by how much attention they get, but by how much validated learning they achieve. Each MVP must answer a clear question and yield data that influences your next move. Reflection. The MVP is not about cutting corners. It's about cutting waste. It's not about rushing. It's about focusing, testing the most important assumptions first, before building too much. In this chapter, Eric Ries gives entrepreneurs permission to be imperfect, to launch messy, learn fast, and evolve intelligently. The MVP is a tool of humility. It says, I don't know everything yet, but I'm willing to find out, quickly, honestly, and with real customers. This is the heart of the lean startup. Progress through learning, not guesswork. Chapter 7. Measure. Learn what matters using innovation accounting. Once a startup has built a minimum viable product, MVP, and introduced it to early users, the next critical step is to measure the results. But not all measurements are useful. In fact, many startups fall into the trap of relying on vanity metrics, numbers that look impressive but offer no guidance. In this chapter, Eric Ries introduces the concept of innovation accounting, a disciplined, data-driven approach to measuring progress when traditional financial accounting doesn't apply. The core idea is simple. In a world of extreme uncertainty, startups must measure learning, not just outcomes. Why traditional metrics don't work. In most established businesses, performance is tracked using metrics like profit, revenue, ROI, and market share. But these don't apply to startups in the early stages. Why? Because startups haven't yet found a sustainable business model. They are still testing their hypotheses about customer behavior, pricing models, product market fit, user engagement. Tracking growth or profit too early can be misleading. You may see progress, but you don't know whether it's real or just a temporary spike. That's why learning must become the primary unit of progress. Actionable versus vanity metrics. Ries makes a sharp distinction between actionable metrics and vanity metrics. Vanity metrics. Page views. App downloads. Press mentions. Raw user count. These numbers often go up, but they don't tell you why or what to do next. Actionable metrics. Activation rate. How many users sign up and start using the product? Retention rate. How many users come back? Conversion rate. How many users become paying customers? These metrics are directly tied to hypotheses and guide strategic decisions. The question is not, is the number big? But, does it help us learn? The 3 learning milestones. Innovation accounting provides a structure for learning. Ries breaks it down into 3 core steps. 1. Establish the baseline. Release an MVP and measure how customers behave right now, without any optimizations. This gives you a starting point. For example, what percentage of users sign up? How many come back a second time? Do they refer friends? This raw data shows whether your current product has any traction at all. 2. Tune the engine. Now, begin a process of optimization. Based on the feedback and results, make small improvements to the product. Adjust a feature. Tweak the pricing. Change the onboarding flow. After each change, measure the results again. The key question: are things improving? If metrics like conversion and retention rise over time, you're making progress. You're learning how to better serve your customers. 3. Pivot or persevere. Eventually, you'll reach a point where you must make a strategic decision. Are the numbers improving enough? Are we learning fast enough? Is our strategy working? If yes, you persevere. Continue optimizing, scaling, and growing. If not, you pivot. Change some element of your product, target audience, or business model to find a new path forward. This moment of decision is at the heart of lean startup. It ensures that time, money, and energy are not wasted chasing a failing idea. Cohort analysis. A better way to track users. One powerful technique Ries recommends is cohort analysis. Instead of looking at all users together, you group them based on when they joined. For example, January users, February users, etc. This lets you compare how different batches behave over time. Do newer users engage more than older ones? Did a new feature improve retention? Cohort analysis reveals cause and effect, something aggregate metrics can't show. It also prevents false optimism. For example, if total users are going up but new cohorts keep churning, your growth is not sustainable. You're just replacing old users with new ones, a dangerous treadmill. Split testing, learning through experiments. Another key tool in the measurement phase is A/B testing or split testing. This involves releasing two versions of a feature to different user groups and measuring which performs better. Example: you're not sure if a blue sign up button converts better than a red one. So you show the blue version to half your users and the red version to the other half. Split tests let you make data-informed decisions without guessing or relying on opinion. Over time, these micro-experiments drive macro growth. But the goal is always the same: measure learning, not just change. Avoiding the numbers trap. It's easy to become overwhelmed by metrics. Or worse, to manipulate them to look better than they are. Startups often fool themselves by cherry-picking data, focusing only on growing metrics, avoiding uncomfortable truths. Ries warns, don't lie to yourself. Data only helps if you're willing to hear what it says, even when it says your product isn't working. A startup must embrace brutal honesty. Your job is not to look good, it's to learn fast. The accountability of learning. What makes innovation accounting powerful is that it brings accountability to the learning process. In traditional business plans, success is measured by execution. Did you build what you said you would? In lean startup, success is measured by learning. Did you discover something new that helps your business grow? This accountability gives structure to the chaotic world of startups. It prevents founders from drifting or avoiding tough decisions. It also allows investors, partners, and teams to track progress in a meaningful way, even before there's revenue. Reflection. In this chapter, Ries reminds us that not all progress is real. A shiny dashboard full of rising metrics can't save a startup that doesn't understand its customers. Only validated learning leads to lasting success. Measurement is not about spreadsheets. It's about wisdom. The wisdom to know what's working, what's not, and what needs to change. The lean startup teaches us to use numbers as a flashlight, not a mirror. Not to admire ourselves, but to illuminate the path forward. Chapter 8. Pivot, or persevere, making the hardest decision in a startup. At the heart of the lean startup method lies one of the most important, and often most painful, decisions an entrepreneur must face. Should we pivot, or should we persevere? By this point, you've built a minimum viable product, MVP, measured real-world data using innovation accounting, and analyzed whether customer behavior supports your hypotheses. Now comes the moment of truth. Do you keep going down the same path, confident that improvements are leading towards sustainable growth? Or do you pivot, fundamentally change direction while staying grounded in what you've learned? Eric Ries argues that this decision is not just strategic, it's emotional. Founders are deeply invested in their ideas. Letting go can feel like failure. But in reality, pivoting is not giving up. It is the essence of lean entrepreneurship. Understanding the pivot. A pivot is a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about your product, business model, or growth strategy. It's not a random change. It's not chasing shiny objects. It's a deliberate, thoughtful shift based on validated learning. Ries offers this analogy. If we have an engine that's not working, a pivot is like changing the engine, not the direction. We're still trying to reach the same destination. Startups pivot to find a better path to the same vision. The danger of persevering too long. Many startups fail not because they built a bad product, but because they spent too long working on the wrong one. They believed in their original idea so fiercely that they ignored the signs. Users weren't engaging. Revenue wasn't growing. Experiments weren't leading to meaningful improvements. Instead of pivoting, they doubled down. They hoped things would improve with more time, more features, more marketing. But hope is not a strategy. Lean startup offers an alternative. learn quickly, and change direction when the data tells you to. How to know it's time to pivot. Rise outlines signs that a pivot may be necessary. Customer feedback is lukewarm, not hateful, not enthusiastic, just indifferent. Cohort metrics are flat or declining, despite continuous improvements. Experiments fail to move key metrics, even after several iterations. The team feels stuck, working hard without seeing results. In other words, you're not learning anything new, and you're not growing. When progress stalls despite best efforts, it's time to ask, are we solving the wrong problem? Types of pivots. Not all pivots are the same. Rise identifies several common types, each offering a new angle on how to better serve your customers. 1. Zoom-in pivot. What you thought was a minor feature becomes the whole product. You drop the rest and focus on what customers really care about. Example: Instagram started as a complicated location-based app called Bourbon. The photo sharing feature was the only one users loved, so they zoomed in. 2. Zoom out pivot. The reverse. Your product isn't enough on its own, so it becomes a feature of something larger. 3. Customer segment pivot. You realize you've targeted the wrong group. The product works, but for a different audience than you expected. 4. Customer need pivot. You discover the problem you're solving isn't important. But through interactions, you find a more pressing need your users actually care about. 5. Platform pivot. You shift from an application to a platform, or vice versa. 6. Business architecture pivot. You change your model, for instance, from high margin, low volume to low margin, high volume. 7. Value capture pivot. You alter how you make money, through subscriptions, freemium, ads, or licensing. 8. Engine of growth pivot. You switch growth strategies. Viral, paid, or sticky. 9. Channel pivot. You find a more effective way to reach your customers. Direct sales, online channels, partnerships. 10. Technology pivot. You keep the solution, but change the tech behind it for better performance or scalability. These pivots are not weaknesses. They are strategic adaptations based on real-world feedback. The pivot meeting. To make pivoting a regular and healthy part of the startup process, Rise recommends institutionalizing it. Hold a pivot meeting every few weeks. Review cohort metrics. Reflect on recent experiments. Ask the hard questions. Are we really making progress? Debate whether a pivot is needed, and what kind. This ritual prevents blind optimism. It creates a rhythm of accountability. It also gives the team psychological safety to discuss bold changes without fear. The emotional challenge of pivoting. While pivoting makes logical sense, it's emotionally difficult. Startups are deeply personal. Founders often tie their identity to their original idea. Admitting that idea doesn't work can feel like admitting failure. But Rise reframes this. The real failure is wasting time building something nobody wants. A startup exists to find a sustainable business. That's the mission. The original idea is just a guess, and guesses should evolve. The best entrepreneurs are humble enough to listen and brave enough to change. Case study. Votison. Votison began as a social tool to help users advocate for political change. Early versions didn't gain traction. The team observed and listened, eventually pivoting to become a platform for digital political campaigning, a space with stronger demand and clearer metrics. This pivot helped them grow and gain traction, even attracting investment from major players. The key lesson: customer insight guided the shift, not gut feeling. Reflection. Pivoting is not a detour. It's the map. This chapter reminds us that startups are experiments, not declarations. The lean startup process encourages us to build, measure, and learn quickly. And when the data shows we're on the wrong path, we change course, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. A pivot is a moment of clarity. It means you've learned something real, and you're ready to act on it. In the lean world, Stubbornness is a liability. Flexibility is power. The startup that thrives is not the one with the strongest vision, but the one with the clearest view of reality. Chapter 9. Batch. Small batches to build and learn faster. In the previous chapters, Eric Ries explained how startups should focus on building a minimum viable product, MVP, measuring customer feedback through innovation accounting, and making critical decisions to pivot or persevere. Now, in Chapter 9, he dives into the concept of batch size, and how the way we organize and execute work can profoundly impact the speed and quality of learning. The lean startup encourages entrepreneurs to break down work into smaller, manageable chunks and test assumptions through small batches, as opposed to large, monolithic efforts. The principle of small batches runs counter to traditional startup culture, which often embraces the idea of working in large batches, the assumption being that bigger is better. In reality, the lean startup method insists that smaller batches accelerate the process of learning, innovation, and iteration. The problem with large batches. Startups often make the mistake of working in large batches, which means building a lot of features or products before testing them with customers. While the idea seems efficient, more work done in less time, large batches can actually be disastrous. Why? Because they delay learning. When you take longer to build a product or feature, you wait longer to get real-world feedback. In the worst case, by the time you realize the feature or product doesn't work, a lot of time and resources have already been wasted. Imagine a startup that builds a new feature, spends months developing it, and only releases it to users at the end of the cycle. If the users don't like the feature, you've lost valuable time, and possibly money, before discovering the mistake. Small batches equals faster feedback. On the other hand, small batches allow teams to learn faster. When you break work into smaller chunks, you can release them more quickly, gather feedback sooner, and iterate based on what you learn. Small batches are like quick experiments. Instead of waiting to see if something will work after months of development, you test it right away, even in an unfinished state. You release only what's necessary, learn from the results, and adjust accordingly. The key to small batches is not to focus on speed or output, but on getting feedback quickly. Whether it's a feature, an idea, or an experiment, you want to take as little time as possible to get data that shows whether your hypothesis is correct. Learning versus efficiency. At first glance, small batches might seem inefficient. After all, working in smaller increments seems like it would take longer than working in large chunks. But that's a common misconception. The real efficiency lies in learning faster. By working in smaller batches, startups can identify problems early before they escalate, make adjustments more frequently, increasing the likelihood of finding a product that customers want. Avoid waste, because you only build what you know customers will use. In other words, small batches speed up the process of innovation by ensuring that you're building the right thing, not just building faster. The manufacturing lesson, just in time. To understand the value of small batches, Ries draws an analogy with manufacturing, particularly Toyota's production system, which revolutionized the car industry with its just-in-time manufacturing process. Before Toyota, car manufacturers built large quantities of cars at once, creating a lot of inventory. This was a risky bet. The company had no way of knowing if the cars would sell until they were released into the market. In contrast, Toyota's system focused on producing smaller quantities of cars and only building what was needed. They worked in small batches, so they could respond quickly to customer demand, reduce waste, and optimize for efficiency. By making this shift, Toyota could improve the quality of their cars while decreasing production time. Similarly, in startups, working in small batches enables you to validate each step of your product development quickly and efficiently. Applying small batches to startups. So, how does the idea of small batches apply to startups? The lean startup model advocates for continuous iteration through rapid experimentation. Every feature, process, or assumption is tested in small batches. Whether you're creating a new product feature, testing an advertisement, or experimenting with customer acquisition strategies, small batches allow you to test individual hypotheses quickly, get feedback from users early, Make incremental improvements rather than waiting for a perfect solution. By operating this way, startups can significantly increase their rate of learning and adapt to market realities faster. Case study: Dropbox. Dropbox provides a clear example of how working in small batches can be effective. When Dropbox was initially created, the founders didn't develop a fully working product before launching. Instead, they made a small batch video that demonstrated the product concept, essentially a prototype of the product. The video demonstrated how the product would work and gathered interest from potential users. The feedback was immediate and positive, allowing the Dropbox team to refine their product without having to spend months building a full feature set. This early, small-scale feedback allowed them to get closer to their product-market fit faster than if they had built out the whole platform before testing. Overcoming the big launch mentality. One of the biggest challenges in lean startup is overcoming the traditional big launch mentality, the belief that success depends on launching a polished, finished product. Many entrepreneurs dream of having a grand product launch, with a website, marketing, and press attention. But this mentality leads to big bets on untested assumptions. With small batches, startups can test concepts in isolation, release partially complete versions, and assess customer reactions in real time. There's no need for a massive product reveal. Instead, you can build momentum gradually, making improvements over time. The power of iteration. Small batches also enable startups to iterate rapidly. After each small experiment or release, entrepreneurs can observe customer behavior, measure feedback, pivot or persevere based on what they learn. This iterative approach ensures that startups evolve continuously, rather than gambling on the success of a massive launch. The more you test, learn, and iterate, the more you can refine your product and adjust to customer needs. The result is a higher likelihood of success, with each batch contributing a small but essential piece to the puzzle. Overcoming the temptation to scale too soon. As the startup begins to show signs of growth, the temptation to scale can become overwhelming. Startups might feel the pressure to expand quickly, scale operations, and hire more people. However, Ries cautions against scaling prematurely. Scaling before you have product-market fit is one of the fastest ways to waste resources. Instead, startups should stay in the small batch mode as long as possible, focusing on iterating and learning. Once the product-market fit is validated, scaling can occur with greater confidence. Reflection. In this chapter, Eric Ries emphasizes the importance of working smarter, not harder. By embracing the concept of small batches, startups can move away from the traditional mindset of completing tasks in large quantities and, instead, embrace the iterative process of learning quickly. Chapter 10. Grow. How to achieve sustainable growth. In the previous chapters, Eric Ries introduced key lean startup concepts like the minimum viable product, MVP, innovation accounting, and pivoting. These are the tools startups use to explore, experiment, and learn. But what happens when a startup has found a promising product and proven that it works? How can entrepreneurs achieve sustainable growth? In this chapter, Ries tackles the next challenge for startups: scaling. While testing and learning are essential, growth is what ultimately determines whether a startup survives or fails. But sustainable growth is not about rushing into expansion. It's about achieving a repeatable, scalable engine for growth. The key message of the chapter: growth doesn't come from marketing tricks or viral campaigns alone. It comes from the systematic and sustainable creation of value. The three engines of growth. Ries identifies three distinct engines that can drive growth in a startup. These engines represent different ways that startups can create sustainable, repeatable growth. The sticky engine of growth. The viral engine of growth. The paid engine of growth. Each engine has different characteristics, costs, and potential for scalability. The goal is to identify the best engine for your product and business model, and then build it deliberately. 1. The sticky engine of growth. The sticky engine focuses on retaining customers over time. In other words, it's about getting customers to keep coming back. This engine works by optimizing the retention rate. It's based on the idea that keeping a customer is cheaper than acquiring a new one. So, if a product or service can keep users engaged, then growth will come naturally as those customers stick around and keep using the product. In this engine, the key metric is user retention. A company using the sticky engine should constantly focus on improving retention through great customer support, regular updates and improvements, creating a product that users love to use. As retention improves, word-of-mouth referrals will grow, leading to a higher lifetime value, LTV, of each customer. An example of the sticky engine in action is Amazon Prime. The more you use it, the more valuable it becomes. The subscription model encourages customers to stick around, and this high retention rate drives consistent revenue growth. 2. The viral engine of growth. The viral engine relies on customers spreading the word about your product. Growth happens when existing users actively refer others to the product or service. This could be through organic word of mouth, social sharing, or referral programs. Viral growth can lead to rapid, exponential increases in users. For this to work, the product must offer something so compelling that users naturally want to share it with others. The more users share the product, the faster the customer base grows. The key metric here is virality, specifically, the viral coefficient. The viral coefficient measures how many new users each existing user brings in. If your viral coefficient is greater than 1, your growth will be exponential. If it's less than 1, your growth will plateau. Facebook and Instagram are examples of companies that grew through the viral engine. Their products were designed to encourage users to invite others to join, and each user became an advocate for the platform. The challenge with the viral engine is that it's difficult to control. You need the product to be inherently shareable, and growth depends on the right type of user behavior. 3. The paid engine of growth. The paid engine is based on using paid advertising or other marketing tactics to acquire customers. In this model, startups spend money on marketing and customer acquisition, and the goal is to create a positive return on investment, ROI. This engine is most effective when the startup has a clear understanding of customer acquisition costs, CAC, and lifetime value, LTV. If the cost to acquire a customer is less than the revenue that customer will bring over their lifetime, then the paid engine can scale. The paid engine is often the most predictable of the three, since it relies on clear financial metrics. Once you know how much it costs to acquire a customer, you can adjust your marketing spend to grow the business. For example, Google Ads or Facebook Ads are common tools for businesses that rely on the paid engine. If the startup can achieve a profitable CAC, then paid advertising becomes a scalable engine for growth. The key challenge of the paid engine is that it requires significant upfront investment and constant monitoring. If a startup spends too much without understanding the CAC/LTV balance, it risks wasting resources. How to choose the right engine. Choosing the right engine depends on your startup's characteristics and goals. Here are some key considerations when deciding which engine is best for your business. Is your product inherently shareable? If yes, the viral engine might be a good fit. Is customer retention a top priority? If yes, the sticky engine will likely be the best choice. Do you have a clear cost per acquisition model and access to advertising channels? If yes, the paid engine could work for you. Many startups will begin with one engine and later shift to another as the business evolves. For example, a startup may begin with the paid engine but switch to the sticky engine as it refines its product and increases retention. The importance of validated learning in growth. Regardless of which engine a startup chooses, validated learning remains critical. Achieving growth is not about simply following best practices or relying on intuition. It's about testing assumptions and measuring results. Startups should continuously experiment with different growth strategies. For example, testing different referral programs for the viral engine, experimenting with different retention tactics for the sticky engine, analyzing different customer acquisition strategies for the paid engine. In this way, lean startup methodology ensures that growth isn't just about throwing money at the problem or hoping for the best. Instead, growth is driven by data-informed decisions. Case study: Zappos. Zappos, the online shoe retailer, is a prime example of a startup that grew using the sticky engine. Instead of focusing heavily on attracting new customers through traditional advertising, Zappos invested in creating outstanding customer service. They offered free returns, free shipping, and a 365-day return policy. As a result, customers not only returned to shop again but also spread the word about the company, generating organic referrals. Zappos achieved remarkable customer loyalty and high retention rates, which led to organic growth. By focusing on keeping customers happy, they built a sustainable growth model. Growth through innovation. Ries reminds entrepreneurs that growth isn't just about finding the right engine. It's about creating an innovative feedback loop where learning and growth feed into each other. Startups must focus on the intersection of innovation and customer needs, which requires constantly experimenting and improving. Whether through new product features, marketing strategies, or customer service, growth depends on an ongoing cycle of learning, experimenting, and improving. Reflection. In this chapter, Ries stresses that sustainable growth is not a byproduct of luck or timing. It's a system of processes that a startup can engineer over time. Whether through the sticky, viral, or paid engines, the goal is to find a scalable and repeatable growth strategy. The essential takeaway is that growth should be intentional and deliberate, driven by customer needs and constant learning. The lean startup method provides entrepreneurs with the tools and mindset to experiment, pivot when necessary, and scale in a way that creates lasting value. As startups embark on the journey toward growth, they must remember that the most successful companies don't just grow quickly, they grow sustainably. This requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to experiment, fail, and learn quickly. Chapter 11. Adapt. Turning setbacks into opportunities. In the previous chapters, Eric Ries has discussed how startups should build, measure, and learn. These processes allow startups to test assumptions, make data-driven decisions, and grow in sustainable ways. However, growth is not linear, and the road to success for most startups is filled with setbacks, pivots, and challenges. So, how should startups adapt when things don't go as planned? In Chapter 11, Ries focuses on how to adapt to changing circumstances, unexpected failures, and market shifts. It's about turning setbacks into opportunities and maintaining the flexibility to adjust the course when necessary. The key message of this chapter is, adaptation is crucial for survival. The ability to respond to failures and challenges, rather than being fixed on a single approach, is often what separates successful startups from those that fail. The role of pivoting in adaptation. One of the central concepts in the lean startup is the idea of the pivot. A pivot is a fundamental shift in strategy, but not necessarily a complete overhaul of the startup's vision or mission. Rather, it's about making changes to the product, business model, or strategy in response to new learning. Pivoting happens when startups realize that their initial assumptions were wrong or not as effective as expected. It could be that customer feedback shows that the product doesn't meet market needs, or the business model is flawed, or the customer base isn't growing as anticipated. Ries uses the example of Twitter, which was originally a podcasting platform. The founders quickly realized that people weren't using the product in the way they had envisioned. However, by pivoting, Twitter became the microblogging platform we know today, which ultimately led to its success. The ability to pivot is essential, but it requires careful thought and analysis. Pivots are not hasty decisions. They should be made based on data and validated learning. The pivot persevere decision. When facing a challenge, startups often must decide whether to pivot or persevere. Persevering means continuing with the current strategy because the feedback suggests that the startup is on the right track. Pivoting, on the other hand, means changing direction because the current path is not working. Ries argues that this decision is data-driven. Entrepreneurs should never pivot on impulse, but instead use customer feedback, product performance, and market trends to make informed decisions. The goal is to pivot strategically, based on valid evidence rather than emotional reactions to failure. The pivot persevere decision is part of the innovation accounting process that was introduced earlier in the book. By measuring progress through metrics that matter, not vanity metrics, entrepreneurs can make decisions grounded in reality. Types of pivots. Ries outlines several types of pivots that startups might consider depending on their situation. Each type involves shifting a critical element of the business strategy. Zoom-in pivot. This happens when a feature of the product becomes so popular that it ends up being the core product. Instead of offering a broader solution, the company focuses solely on that successful feature. Zoom-out pivot. The opposite of a zoom-in pivot. Here, a company realizes that its initial idea was too narrow or too specific, so it expands its offering to include more features or capabilities to serve a broader market. Customer segment pivot. The company realizes that the product does not fit the target audience it originally aimed to serve. A pivot in this case means targeting a completely different customer segment with the same product or a modified version. Customer need pivot. The product might not address the exact need initially identified. In this case, the startup might pivot by adapting the product to meet a new or different customer need. Platform pivot. A company that starts with a product might pivot to become a platform by allowing other companies to build on its offering. This often occurs when the product is widely adopted and there's potential for network effects. Business architecture pivot. This pivot focuses on the business model itself. For example, a company might change from a high-margin, low-volume model to a low-margin, high-volume model or vice versa. Value capture pivot. A startup may find that its business model needs to be changed to capture more value from customers. This could involve changing pricing models, revenue structures, or even switching from a direct sales model to a subscription-based model. Each of these pivots is a response to a specific set of challenges. The key is recognizing when a pivot is needed and executing it thoughtfully. A successful pivot often leads to a more scalable and sustainable business model. The power of failing fast. Startups are inherently risky ventures, and failure is an inevitable part of the process. However, Ries emphasizes the importance of failing fast. Instead of spending years building a product that ultimately doesn't work, startups should aim to fail early and cheaply by testing assumptions as quickly as possible. By validating hypotheses quickly and pivoting when necessary, startups can avoid large-scale failures. The quicker a startup can learn from its mistakes, the less it will waste on ineffective strategies. For example, instead of spending months on a new feature, startups can release a prototype or run a test with a small group of users. This allows the team to fail early, adjust, and move forward with lessons learned. The lean startup method and the pivot process. The lean startup process is designed to encourage rapid adaptation. When things go wrong, or when new information suggests a different approach is necessary, startups can adjust quickly and efficiently. The build, measure, learn loop is particularly important here, as it allows teams to test ideas, gain customer feedback, and make informed pivots or perseveres. Ries also emphasizes that adaptation is a team effort. Leaders should cultivate a culture of experimentation and openness to change. Employees at all levels should feel empowered to suggest new ideas, challenge assumptions, and experiment with different strategies. An adaptive mindset within the team ensures that the startup can respond to setbacks with resilience and creativity. Case study. Instagram. Instagram's pivot is a classic example of how a startup can adapt when things aren't going as planned. Initially, Instagram started as a location-based social network called Bourbon. After feedback and analysis, the founders noticed that users were more interested in sharing photos than checking in at locations. This realization led them to pivot to a photo-sharing platform, which ultimately became the Instagram we know today. Instagram's success story highlights how adapting to user behavior and market demands can lead to an unexpected but highly successful product. Rather than sticking rigidly to the original vision, the Instagram team was willing to embrace change and focus on what their customers truly wanted. Building resilience through adaptation. While pivoting is an essential tool, Ries reminds us that it's not always about completely changing the direction of the startup. Sometimes, adapting means making small adjustments, optimizing processes, or improving customer service. Gradual adaptation can also lead to tremendous growth, and it often prevents startups from overreacting to every challenge. Entrepreneurs should build resilience into their mindset, understanding that setbacks are part of the journey. Instead of viewing challenges as failures, startups can treat them as opportunities to learn, adapt, and refine their strategies. Reflection. In this chapter, Eric Ries emphasizes that adaptation is crucial for long-term success. Startups must be prepared to pivot when necessary and persevere when they're on the right track. The ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances is what enables startups to survive and thrive in a constantly shifting market. The key takeaway from this chapter is the importance of being flexible and data-driven. By staying open to new possibilities and willing to experiment, startups can navigate through difficult times, learn from failures, and adjust their strategies to create better products and business models. Adaptation is not a sign of failure, but a sign of growth and resilience. Successful startups embrace change, learn from their experiences, and continue to evolve toward better solutions. Chapter 12. Innovate. Creating a culture of continuous innovation. In the final chapters of The Lean Startup, Eric Ries moves beyond the early startup phase to examine how innovation can be sustained and institutionalized as a startup grows. Many companies begin with a burst of creativity and risk-taking, but as they grow and add structure, they often lose the agility and experimental spirit that made them successful in the first place. In Chapter 12, Ries focuses on how to maintain a culture of innovation even as an organization matures. The key message here is, to continue innovating, companies must intentionally design systems that promote experimentation, learning, and flexibility at scale. Innovation doesn't happen by accident. It requires creating an environment where learning is continuous, failure is safe, and ideas are tested rapidly. Why innovation dies in growing companies. Ries begins by explaining why innovation tends to slow down or disappear in larger companies. As organizations grow, they naturally introduce hierarchy, formal processes, and risk aversion. These structures are helpful for scaling operations and maintaining quality, but they also discourage the very experimentation that drives innovation. The typical reasons innovation dies include fear of failure. In large organizations, failure often comes with consequences. Employees become hesitant to try new ideas if they think it might hurt their reputation or job security. Silos and bureaucracy. Departments become isolated and slow. Communication is rigid. Approvals take too long. Short-term thinking. Focus shifts to quarterly results, and long-term innovation takes a back seat to short-term performance. Ries argues that if innovation is not intentionally protected, it will be crushed by the forces of standardization and control. Building an innovation sandbox. To combat this, Ries introduces the concept of the innovation sandbox. This is a safe space within the organization where new ideas can be tested without requiring permission from multiple layers of management. Here's how an innovation sandbox works. Teams are allowed to experiment freely within defined boundaries. Experiments must be time-boxed and budget-limited. Only a small, representative portion of the customer base is affected by the experiment. The team must collect data and share results transparently. If the experiment proves successful, it can be scaled. This system allows innovation to thrive without threatening the core business. It protects the company from unnecessary risk, while still encouraging bold experimentation. A key idea here is that constraints don't stifle creativity, they focus it. When teams know their limits, they work smarter and move faster. Entrepreneurial managers, champions of innovation. Another concept Ries introduces is that of the entrepreneurial manager. These are not entrepreneurs in the traditional sense, but rather leaders within a larger organization who take on the role of a startup founder inside their company. Entrepreneurial managers promote a culture of experimentation, shield their teams from political interference, focus on validated learning instead of vanity metrics, are comfortable with uncertainty and failure. These managers are essential in scaling lean startup practices across departments. Ries suggests that growing companies should deliberately identify and support these individuals. Give them space, resources, and authority to run experiments. Without these champions, innovation becomes isolated or dies altogether. Balancing efficiency and innovation. Large companies are often optimized for efficiency, not learning. They reward predictability, standardization, and the elimination of waste. While these are important traits for stability, they are often at odds with innovation, which is inherently messy, uncertain, and resource-consuming. Ries proposes that companies create dual operating systems. One system, the traditional org structure, focuses on execution, delivering current products, optimizing processes, and meeting financial targets. The other system, the innovation sandbox or startup teams, focuses on discovery, testing new products, entering new markets, and experimenting with new business models. The two systems must coexist and be connected by shared values and transparent communication. This model is inspired by how successful companies like Toyota and Amazon manage to innovate consistently while scaling. Innovation accounting at scale. In earlier chapters, Ries discussed innovation accounting, the process of measuring progress for startups using actionable metrics instead of vanity metrics. In this chapter, he expands that idea to the entire organization. When innovation efforts are spread across many teams, leadership needs standardized metrics to measure their progress and impact. These metrics should focus on customer behavior, e.g., retention, conversion, referrals, track progress through cohorts, not just raw totals, encourage validated learning, not superficial success. For example, if a team launches a new feature, the question shouldn't be how many people clicked on it, but rather, did the feature improve long-term engagement or retention? By standardizing innovation metrics, leadership can evaluate which experiments to scale and which to abandon, without relying on gut feelings or office politics. Case study. Intuit. Ries highlights Intuit, the maker of TurboTax and QuickBooks, as an example of a company that built an internal system for continuous innovation. Intuit launched a program encouraging employees to run small, fast experiments, sometimes in as little as 24 hours. They trained hundreds of employees in lean startup principles and gave them autonomy to test new ideas. Importantly, Intuit's leadership also changed how they measured success. Instead of focusing only on revenue, they started tracking how many experiments were run, how fast teams were learning, and how frequently pivots occurred. This shift allowed Intuit to rediscover its entrepreneurial spirit, without losing operational control. Embedding innovation into culture. For innovation to become a core part of a company's DNA, it must be reflected in hiring practices. Look for candidates who are adaptable, curious, and comfortable with ambiguity. Performance reviews. Reward learning and experimentation, not just short-term wins. Leadership behavior. Executives must model risk-taking and continuous learning. One of the most important cultural shifts is making failure acceptable. In innovative companies, failed experiments are seen as valuable lessons, not embarrassing mistakes. This cultural shift removes the fear that stifles creativity. Innovation becomes sustainable when teams know they will be supported, even when things go wrong, as long as they are learning. Reflection. In this chapter, Eric Ries delivers a powerful message. Innovation is not a phase, it's a habit. If startups want to grow into innovative, resilient organizations, they must deliberately build systems that support continuous experimentation and learning. Companies that succeed long-term are not the ones with the best ideas. They are the ones with the best systems for testing ideas quickly and learning from the results. The lean startup model doesn't stop when a product finds market fit or a startup becomes profitable. It continues to provide a framework for repeating the innovation process over and over again, at scale. The ultimate goal is to create an organization that never stops learning, never stops adapting. Chapter 13. Epilogue. Waste not. In the epilogue of the lean startup, Eric Ries steps back from the individual tactics and strategies laid out in previous chapters to focus on the broader mission that inspired the lean startup movement. While the book is filled with practical tools, MVPs, pivot persevere decisions, innovation accounting, this final chapter reflects on why these tools matter and what is truly at stake. The title Waste Not refers to a central idea in lean thinking: eliminating waste in all forms, not just in manufacturing or product development, but in human potential, resources, time, and effort. Ries argues that most startups don't fail because their founders are lazy or unskilled. They fail because they spend enormous effort building the wrong things. The human cost of waste. Ries begins by emphasizing the emotional and human toll of building products that don't succeed. Startup teams often work around the clock, sacrificing personal time, health, and financial security in pursuit of their vision. It's heartbreaking when those sacrifices result in a product that nobody wants, especially when that outcome could have been avoided with earlier testing and learning. This is not just a loss for the entrepreneur, it's a loss for society. The creativity, passion, and effort poured into a failed venture represent resources that could have been redirected towards solving real problems. This is the true cost of waste. The lean startup methodology, then, is not just a business tactic, it's a moral imperative. It allows entrepreneurs to minimize wasted effort and maximize value creation, both for their businesses and the world at large. Startups as engines of economic growth. Ries also discusses the economic importance of startups. In a global economy increasingly driven by innovation and technology, startups play a key role in creating new markets, solving emerging problems, and driving job growth. However, traditional management practices are often ill-equipped to handle the uncertainty and speed of modern entrepreneurship. That's where lean startup comes in. By applying lean principles, startups can become more effective engines of growth. They can deliver value faster, iterate on solutions in real time, and avoid the bloated, top-heavy structures that stifle innovation. Governments, investors, and institutions should support this model not just because it helps individual companies succeed, but because it represents a new model of productivity for the 21st century. A call to action. Redefining productivity. One of the most powerful moments in the epilogue is Ries' redefinition of productivity. In traditional business thinking, productivity means doing more with less, producing more units, increasing output, or maximizing efficiency. But for startups, productivity means something different. Learning what customers actually want and delivering it to them with minimal waste. This kind of productivity is harder to measure. It doesn't show up immediately in sales figures or quarterly reports. But it is far more valuable in the long run, because it leads to the creation of products that truly matter. Ries urges entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders to embrace this new definition of productivity, to build cultures and systems that reward learning, experimentation, and adaptability. Waste is a choice. Perhaps the most radical idea Ries shares in the epilogue is that waste is not inevitable. It is a byproduct of outdated methods, rigid thinking, and fear of failure. With the right mindset and the right tools, startups can operate leanly, efficiently, and ethically, without burning out their teams or wasting years of effort. Every startup, Ries says, has a choice. It can continue to follow the old path, build, hope, and pray, or it can adopt a new path. Build, measure, learn. The lean startup path requires humility, discipline, and a willingness to question assumptions. But it leads to greater impact, faster growth, and a more fulfilling entrepreneurial journey. Reflection. A new age of entrepreneurship. The epilogue closes with a message of hope and responsibility. We are entering an era in which entrepreneurship is more accessible than ever. With cloud computing, global markets, and digital platforms, anyone with a vision can start a business. But with this accessibility comes responsibility. Entrepreneurs have a duty to use their time and resources wisely, to test ideas before scaling them, and to listen closely to their customers. The lean startup methodology provides a roadmap for doing this. It's not just a set of tools. It's a philosophy that places learning at the center of entrepreneurship. It challenges us to build companies that are not just successful, but also meaningful and impactful. The big question of our time, Ries writes, is not can it be built, but should it be built? This single shift, from building for the sake of building to building with purpose, has the power to transform industries, economies, and lives. Final thoughts. With the lean startup, Eric Ries has given the world more than a playbook for startup success. He has offered a new way of thinking about innovation, one grounded in humility, experimentation, and continuous improvement. The final message of the book is clear. Entrepreneurship is too important to be left to chance. By learning to eliminate waste, test assumptions, and adapt quickly, startups can create products that matter, build companies that last, and make the world a better place. Lean is not just about doing more with less. It's about doing the right things, with purpose, precision, and passion. Final conclusion: the Lean Startup, a new era of innovation. As we reach the end of this in-depth journey through the Lean Startup, it's clear that Eric Ries has not simply written a manual for entrepreneurs. He has introduced a new mindset, a new lens through which we can view the act of building, growing, and sustaining innovative businesses. At the heart of the Lean Startup lies a deceptively simple cycle: build, measure, learn. But these three words contain a profound truth, one that challenges centuries of business tradition. Instead of waiting for a perfect product, we are urged to launch early. Instead of guessing what customers want, we are taught to listen carefully and learn from real behavior. Instead of fearing failure, we are called to fail fast, learn faster, and adapt continuously. A new definition of success. Traditional business thinking often defines success in terms of profit, growth, and market dominance. But Rise reframes success for startups. It is not about how much you build, but how much you learn. It is not about how many users you acquire, but how many love and truly need what you offer. And it is not about building a monument to your vision, but creating value with minimal waste. This is a different kind of entrepreneurship, one rooted in humility, discipline, and curiosity. From vision to impact. Throughout the book, Rise reminds us that startups are not smaller versions of large companies. They are unique environments, operating in uncertainty, driven by vision, and designed for discovery. That vision is vital. Without it, we are just reacting. But vision alone is not enough. The Lean Startup method gives us the tools to test our vision rigorously, iteratively, and sustainably, so that our ideas can grow, evolve, and survive in the real world. Whether you are launching a tech startup, building a new product in a corporation, or even leading a social enterprise, the lessons in the Lean Startup apply. Because ultimately, this book is not just about business. It is about how we solve problems, serve people, and create things that matter. The call to every innovator. As Rise reminds us in the final chapter, waste is a choice. We can choose to build blindly, hoping to strike gold, or we can build wisely, guided by data, driven by feedback, and anchored in purpose. The Lean Startup method empowers every innovator, every entrepreneur, and every dreamer to turn their vision into reality. Not through luck or brute force, but through smart, systematic learning. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that anyone, anywhere, can be an entrepreneur. You don't need millions in funding. You don't need a perfect plan. You need a mindset, a willingness to learn, to experiment, and to keep moving forward. Final reflection. In a world moving faster than ever, filled with complexity and uncertainty, the Lean Startup offers something invaluable: clarity, direction, and hope. It reminds us that innovation is not a mystery. It's a process. And if we're willing to follow that process, to test, to pivot, to listen, we can build products, companies, and movements that truly change lives. So as you close this chapter and return to your own entrepreneurial journey, carry these principles with you. Build with purpose. Measure with honesty. Learn with humility. And never forget. It's not just about building things. It's about building the right things.